I want you to just imagine for a second that you bite into a freshly cut lemon. Like, just really think about what happens.
Oh, I can already feel my jaw tightening up just hearing you say that.
Right. Your face instantly scrunches up. Your mouth just floods with saliva. You feel that really sharp, electric, unmistakable jolt of sourness spreading all across your tongue.
Yeah, it's a very visceral reaction.
It really is. And right now, a neurosurgeon with some advanced imaging technology could theoretically look at your brain in real time. They could trace the exact electrical signals that caused your facial muscles to contract and your salivary glands to activate.
They could map the chemical cascades with perfect precision, yeah.
Exactly. But, and this is the crazy part, if that same neurosurgeon zooms in on all that gray tissue, on all those firing synapses, and they go looking for the actual sourness like the subjective, private feeling you just experienced, they are never going to find it.
No, they won't.
So where does the feeling actually live?
I mean, it is the ultimate irony of modern scientific progress, isn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, we can look at the structure of the universe at the Planck scale. We've mapped the cosmic horizon. We can trace our own evolution back billions of years, from single-celled organisms in some primordial soup, all the way up to the human cerebral cortex.
Right, we've basically conquered the physical world.
We really have, but the very instrument we use to observe all of this, our own subjective awareness, remains just an absolute profound enigma.
And that is exactly the territory we are mapping today. You, the listener, have sent us this incredible stack of sources.
It's quite the reading list.
It really is. We've got dense neurobiology papers. We've got philosophical thought experiments. We've got these really revolutionary clinical case studies. And the mission for this deep dive is to just plunge completely into this material.
Dive right into the deep end.
Exactly. We're going to sit in the mystery of what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness.
Okay.
And we're going to unpack what this massive blind spot actually means for human intellectual life.
But we should probably assure everyone that we are going to do it without getting buried in impenetrable academic jargon.
Oh, absolutely. No one wants to hear a textbook read aloud.
Which requires setting the right tone from the very first minute. Because if you're listening to this hoping for a neat, perfectly tied with a bow answer at the end of our time today,
You're going to be very disappointed.
you really will need to adjust your expectations. Today is about getting comfortable with deep conceptual uncertainty. We cannot frame consciousness as some peripheral, quirky puzzle that, a lab at MIT is going to just solve next Tuesday.
Right. It's not like curing a specific disease.
Exactly. It is the central mystery of our existence. It dictates literally every other question we are even capable of asking.
Okay, well, let's unpack this. To really grasp why consciousness is such a seemingly insurmountable wall for science, we first have to draw a line in the sand, don't we?
We do.
Like, we have to separate what science is built to do from what it currently appears, well, completely unequipped to do.
Yeah.
We need to talk about the easy problems versus the hard problem.
And that distinction takes us back to a real watershed moment in 1995.
Oh, the David Chalmers paper.
Yes. The philosopher David Chalmers delivered this totally groundbreaking paper at a conference in Tucson, Arizona. It was called Facing Up to the Problem of Consciousness.
Catchy title.
Right. And in this paper, he introduced a classification that basically just completely reshaped how cognitive science and philosophy approach the mind.
He separated the easy problems from the hard problem.
He did.
Now, I'm assuming when a guy like Chalmers labels something an easy problem in neuroscience, he doesn't mean something you or I could just sketch out on a napkin over lunch, right?
Oh, far from it. By easy, Chalmers simply means these problems are scientifically tractable.
Tractable, meaning we have the tools to figure them out.
Exactly. They are problems of mechanism and function. The easy problems involve explaining things like how the brain integrates information from different sensory inputs, or how it discriminates between a red light and a green light, how it controls our motor behavior in response to those lights.
Right. How we focus our attention or verbally report what we're feeling.
Precisely. So mapping the exact neural pathway that makes your hand pull away from a hot stove, that is an easy problem.
Even though mapping that is a monumental, incredibly complex scientific challenge.
Huge challenge. It takes billions of dollars and decades of research. But they are challenges that fit perfectly within our standard third-person scientific methodology.
Because we can observe them?
We can observe them, we can measure them, and we can map the electrochemical basis of the neural transmission that makes them happen.
Like if a specific neural pathway fires, A specific physical action or cognitive function occurs?
Yes, we are basically just looking at a really complicated machine and figuring out what the gears do.
Okay, so if figuring out the entire mechanical operation of the human brain is just the easy problem, what on earth is the hard problem?
The hard problem is explaining why any of the performance of those physical functions is accompanied by a subjective experience.
Why there is a feeling?
Exactly. Why is there something it is like to be a conscious creature? You can map all the mechanical, physical, and chemical processes in the brain perfectly. You can know exactly how the visual cortex processes wavelengths of light.
But that map gives you absolutely no explanation for the feeling of those processes.
None whatsoever.
Let me make sure I'm visualizing this correctly, because as I was going through the sources, I kept thinking about a high-end digital camera.
Okay, yeah, walk me through that.
So a camera takes in light through a lens. It processes wavelength information. It stores that information as data on a memory card.
Right, it's doing complex information processing.
Exactly. But when my eyes take in those exact same wavelengths of light,
Yeah.
and my visual cortex processes that exact same information, I'm not just a data storage device.
No, you're not.
I actually experience the vibrant, subjective, unmistakable redness of an apple. Like, why does the human system have that extra step?
That is the million-dollar question.
Why do we feel the searing agony of tissue damage when we touch a hot stove instead of just transmitting a silent functional damage report to a central processor?
Like a robot would.
Right. A robot just registers, sensor damage and left appendage, initiate withdrawal sequence, but we scream, we cry, we feel misery.
That analogy perfectly isolates the gap. I mean, the digital camera and the human visual cortex are both processing information.
Yeah.
The robot and the human hand are both detecting damage and initiating a withdrawal response. But only one system has an inner life.
Only one has that private movie playing inside.
Yes. Only one has a subjective reality playing out. And what makes Chalmers' 1995 paper so explosive is his argument that this isn't just a matter of science needing a few more decades of funding to figure it out.
He thinks it's a completely different kind of problem.
He argues that the hard problem is categorically different from the easy problems. He suggests it might be entirely unanswerable within the framework of our current scientific methodology.
Wow. Because our current scientific method is built from the ground up to measure objective third-person physical facts.
Exactly. You can put a brain on a scale, you can measure the voltage of a neuron.
But you cannot put the feeling of sadness in a test tube.
Yeah.
You can't, measure the mass of a memory.
You really can't. Modern science was essentially founded back in the 17th century by intentionally pushing subjective qualities out of the physical world.
Wait, really? Intentionally?
Oh, absolutely. Thinkers like Galileo and Descartes pushed things like color, taste, and smell out of the physical realm and into the mind,
Why would they do that?
so that physics could focus purely on mathematically measurable things. Mass, size, motion. Science is spectacularly successful precisely because it ignores the subjective.
That makes so much sense.
Right. So when we now turn the tools of science around and try to use them to explain the subjective mind, the tools fundamentally break.
Because they were designed to ignore the mind.
Exactly. This raises the ultimate question of whether observation, measurement, and reductionism are even equipped to capture subjective experience.
Okay, but if the very tools of neuroscience are seemingly incapable of capturing the feeling itself, why do we constantly see headlines about scientists finding the quote-unquote source of consciousness in the brain?
Oh, those headlines.
Right. In reading through these sources, I realized there is a massive trap here that we all fall into. We constantly conflate two very different concepts.
We do. The trap is confusing the neural correlates of consciousness with consciousness itself.
We confuse the physical wiring with the actual experience.
Yes. I mean, neuroscience has made jaw-dropping progress over the last few decades in identifying these neural correlates.
What exactly are they?
They are the specific brain processes, the exact patterns of electrical and chemical activity that reliably accompany a conscious experience.
Okay.
We can point to the hardware states that correlate with the software running.
So it's like saying, every time I feel happy, this specific part of my brain lights up.
Precisely. Let's dig into the two leading neuroscientific frameworks covered in the source material, because they illustrate this perfectly.
Okay, let's start with the global workspace theory. This was originally proposed by Bernard Bars, right?
Yes, and later developed into a highly precise neural model by Stanislas Dehaene.
The sources describe this as a kind of internal broadcasting system. How does that physically work?
Well, global workspace theory proposes that consciousness isn't located in one specific seat in the brain. There's no single consciousness gland.
Right.
Instead, it is associated with the wide-scale broadcasting of information across highly distributed networks.
Okay, so how should I picture that?
Imagine the brain as a massive dark theater.
A dark theater. Got it.
Unconscious processes are happening all around in the dark. They're regulating your heartbeat, parsing grammar as you listen to my voice, maintaining your balance.
Just the background crew doing their jobs.
Exactly. But then a piece of information is brought onto the brightly lit stage.
And that stage is the workspace.
Yes. When information enters this global workspace, it undergoes what they call a nonlinear ignition.
That sounds intense.
It is. Specific types of neurons, primarily pyramidal neurons in the prefrontal and parietal cortices, fire in a synchronized cascading wave.
Oh, wow.
And their long-range axons transmit this information across the entire brain simultaneously.
Suddenly, a single piece of information is made available to multiple cognitive systems at the exact same time.
Exactly. Your memory, your motor control, your language centers, they all get the memo concurrently. And according to this theory, that global availability is consciousness.
Okay, that makes functional sense. Like, if I smell smoke in my house, my brain doesn't just quietly register it in the olfactory bulb.
No, it would be dangerous if it did.
Right. It broadcasts the smell of smoke to my memory to ask, did I leave the stove on? It
Yeah.
broadcasts to my motor cortex to make me stand up. It broadcasts to my language center so I can yell to my family.
That's a perfect example.
That broadcasting mechanism is brilliant. But let's look at the other major theory in our SAC. Integrated Information Theory, or IIT.
Developed by Giulio Tononi.
Yeah, this one feels a lot more abstract to me.
It is. IIT takes a radically different, highly mathematical approach. Instead of starting with the brain's anatomy and looking for where consciousness happens, Tononi starts with the essential properties of conscious experience itself.
Which are what, exactly?
He notes that every conscious experience is highly informative, meaning it is one specific experience out of trillions of possible alternatives.
Okay.
And it is highly integrated. You cannot separate the redness of a read book from the book shape of the book in your visual field. They are perceived as a single unified whole.
Right. I don't see color and shape separately and then stitch them together manually. It just arrives as a book. So how do they translate that into a scientific model?
They propose that consciousness actually corresponds to a specific mathematical property of information integration within any physical system.
And they have a measurement for it, right?
They have created a theoretical measurement, a quantity called phi, represented by the Greek letter phi.
Wait, hold on. They are literally trying to put a numerical value on consciousness.
Conceptually, yes.
Like, my thermostat has a phi of 0.1, my dog has a phi of 50, and I have a phi of 1,000.
That is the basic idea. Phi measures the degree to which a system integrates information in a way that cannot be reduced down to its individual independent parts.
Oh, I think I did.
It measures the cause and effect power that a system has over itself.
So if you have a system where the parts don't interact, much like the pixels on a digital camera sensor,
Good example.
because each pixel just records light independently without caring what the pixel next to it is doing, that system would have a phi of practically 0, right?
Exactly. It is not integrated. But the human cerebral cortex is a wildly dense web of interconnectivity.
Because the state of one neural network heavily influences the state of millions of others.
Precisely. It has a massive phi score. Therefore, according to IIT, it has a high degree of consciousness.
Okay, so we have global workspace theory, identifying the physical mechanism of broadcasting through pyramidal neurons.
Yes.
And we have integrated information theory, calculating the mathematical cause and effect power of a system. Correct. These are rigorous, beautiful scientific models. But they haven't actually answered the hard problem, have they?
They haven't, and this is the crux of the entire debate.
Because they still don't explain the feeling.
Exactly. While these theories are brilliant at identifying the physical properties and the mechanisms associated with consciousness, they completely fail Chalmers' test.
Right. They explain the mechanism, they explain the mathematics, but they do absolutely nothing to explain why broadcasting information across a cortex or having a high phi score actually produces a subjective reality.
They tell us what physical properties are present when consciousness happens, but they offer no causal explanation for why those physical properties generate a feeling.
It feels like having the most intricate, perfect blueprint of a television set.
Oh, I like that.
Like you know exactly what every circuit, resistor, and pixel does, you know how the electricity flows through the system, but the blueprint gives you absolutely no clue as to why the television is currently playing a romantic comedy instead of a horror movie.
That is a highly apt way to look at it. The blueprint explains the hardware, not the plot of the film.
We have the blueprint of the hardware, we know how the machine operates, but the lived experience, the plot of the film, remains totally unaccounted for by the physical schematics.
Which perfectly sets up a concept I was reading about in Chalmers' work within our source stack.
The zombie thing.
Yes, the idea of the philosophical zombie. Now, clearly, we aren't talking about reanimated corpses eating brains.
Right, no Romero zombies here.
Yeah.
What exactly is a philosophical zombie, and why is this thought experiment supposed to be a death blow to standard neuroscience?
The philosophical zombie is a thought experiment designed to test the limits of physical explanations. I want you to imagine a creature that is an exact atom-for-atom physical replica of you.
Okay, an exact duplicate. Like a clone, but deeper.
Yes. This replica has the exact same biological wiring as you. It has the exact same global workspace broadcasting information via pyramidal neurons.
Same brain structure.
Exactly. If we measure its brain activity, it has the exact same phi score as you. If you pinch this replica's arm, it pulls away, its face contorts, and it says, ouch, just like you would.
It behaves identically to me in every conceivable scenario.
It cries at sad movies, it laughs at jokes, it passes every possible outward test of being human.
Okay, so what's missing?
Here is the defining catch. This replica has absolutely zero inner experience. The lights are on, but nobody is home.
Whoa.
There is no subjective feeling of pain when it says, ouch.
Yeah.
There is no internal experience of color when it stops at a red light.
It's just a machine.
It is a highly complex, brilliantly programmed biological automaton processing inputs and generating outputs in the dark. That is a philosophical zombie.
So it's essentially a perfectly functioning human machine with the consciousness completely hollowed out.
Exactly.
Why does imagining this matter so much? I mean, it's just a sci-fi concept.
Because the entire philosophical debate pivots on one question. Is the zombie logically conceivable?
What do you mean by logically conceivable? Do you mean like, could we actually build one in a lab today?
No, not physically possible in our current universe. Biologically conceivable, philosophers mean. Does the concept of the zombie contain any inherent logical contradiction?
Okay, give me an example of a logical contradiction.
For example, you cannot logically conceive of a square circle. The definition of a square directly contradicts the definition of a circle. It is logically impossible.
Right, my brain just rejects it.
But is it logically possible to have a complete physical system, a brain doing all its mechanical processing, without any inner experience attached to it?
I mean, yeah. I can easily imagine a biological robot doing all the mechanical stuff without actually feeling anything. There's no logical contradiction in that idea at all.
And that admission right there is exactly what dualists rely on.
Why?
Because if the zombie is logically conceivable, it proves something massive. It proves that the complete physical description of a person does not automatically entail consciousness. Let me say that again. If you can have all the physical facts, but still lack the consciousness facts, then consciousness cannot be fully reduced to a physical description. The physical facts are not all the facts.
That is heavy. Let me make sure I've got this. Because physics alone doesn't logically guarantee that a feeling has to exist, physics alone isn't enough to explain my mind.
Correct. That is the core argument against physicalism.
Okay, but what do the physicalists say? They can't just accept that.
No, they don't. Philosophers who defend physicalism counter-argue that the zombie is actually not conceivable.
Wait, they say I can't imagine it. I just did.
They argue that our ability to imagine it is just a failure of our own imagination. They argue that if you perfectly replicate all the physical properties, the entire functional system, the high phi score, the global broadcasting, you must necessarily have consciousness.
They think it just comes along for the ride automatically.
Yes. They justify this using analogies from science. Imagine someone living in the 18th century saying, I can logically conceive of a substance that has all the exact physical and chemical properties of H2O, but it isn't wet.
But wetness is just what H2O does at a macro scale. You can't have one without the other.
Exactly. The physicalist argues that wetness isn't some extra magical property added to H2O. It is just the macro-level description of those microscopic interactions.
Oh, I see.
In the same way, they argue that consciousness is just what this specific type of complex physical brain activity is. To imagine the brain activity happening without consciousness is as logically confused as imagining H2O without wetness.
Okay, so if physicalism insists that neuroscience will eventually explain everything, but the dualists argue that physicalism is logically incomplete, we're at a total impasse here.
We really are.
If looking closer at the brain just gives us more maps and correlations, but no causal explanation for the feeling itself, we are forced to step outside the laboratory, aren't we?
We have to look at philosophy.
Right. We have to look at how philosophers try to solve a problem that seemingly breaks the scientific method. Let's spend some real time exploring the 4 major philosophical battlegrounds outlined in our sources.
Let's start with the dominant position in contemporary philosophy of mind, which is also the view implicitly held by virtually all working neuroscientists.
Physicalism?
Yes, also known as materialism. The core claim here is simple, even if the details get complex. Consciousness is entirely physical.
Good.
It is identical with, reducible to, or necessarily produced by specific physical processes in the brain. There is nothing else in the universe besides physical matter and physical laws.
But within physicalism, there are some radically different flavors, right? Like they agree it's physical, but they violently disagree on how it's physical.
Exactly. Let's look at the most extreme version first. Eliminative materialism.
Oh, the Churchlands. This one really got under my skin.
It gets under a lot of people's skin. It's famously championed by philosophers Paul and Patricia Churchland. And their argument is quite radical.
So what do they actually believe?
They argue that our everyday common sense understanding of the mind, what they call folk psychology, is fundamentally flawed.
Folk psychology?
Yeah.
Like just how normal people talk about their feelings.
Right. They believe that words we use every single day, like belief, desire, sadness, and even consciousness itself, do not actually refer to real things in the brain.
Wait, they think the word consciousness doesn't refer to anything real, like it's a fake concept.
They argue that folk psychology is a primitive, inaccurate theory, much like the medieval medical theory of the 4 humors.
The 4 humors.
Yeah, centuries ago, if you were sick, a doctor might say you had an imbalance of black bile.
Right, and they'd put leeches on you.
Exactly. But we eventually eliminated the concept of black bile completely once we discovered bacteria and viruses. We didn't try to map black bile onto bacteria, we just threw the old word away.
So they are saying we need to throw the word consciousness away.
Yes. They argue that as neuroscience matures, we will completely abandon our imprecise psychological vocabulary.
So I wouldn't say I'm experiencing a subjective feeling of pain.
No. You would say, my C fibers are currently firing at a high frequency in response to tissue damage. The subjective feeling isn't a mystery to be solved, it's an outdated concept to be eliminated.
Okay, I really have to push back on the Churchlands here.
Go for it.
I mean, I understand the logic of updating our vocabulary when science improves. We don't talk about black bile anymore.
Okay.
That makes sense. But I cannot get behind the idea of eliminating the reality of the feeling.
It feels like a step too far.
It does. If I slam my finger in a car door, I don't care what my C fibers are doing. The throbbing, miserable agony is the most undeniably real thing in my universe at that moment.
You can't just linguistically wave away the reality of suffering by calling it a C fiber firing.
Exactly. It just feels intellectually dishonest to say the pain isn't real.
And that visceral rejection you're feeling is exactly why eliminative materialism is a minority view. Most people find it deeply counterintuitive.
So what's the alternative within physicalism?
Moving to a slightly softer physicalist view, you have type identity theory.
Okay, how does that work?
This simply holds that mental states are brain states. They are one and the same. The feeling of pain just is the firing of C fibers viewed from a different perspective.
Like Clark Kent and Superman.
Yes. 2 different ways of describing the exact same entity.
And what about functionalism? Because that one comes up a lot when we talk about artificial intelligence.
Yes. Functionalism is the 3rd major flavor of physicalism. Functionalists argue that mental states are not defined by what they are made of, not by biological tissue, but entirely by their functional roles.
Defined by what they do.
Precisely. How does an input connect to an internal state, and how does that generate an output?
Meaning the hardware doesn't actually matter, only the software.
That's the core of it. This is called multiple realizability. A functionalist would argue that a system built of silicon chips could absolutely be conscious so long as it performs the exact same complex functional roles as the biological neural networks in a human brain.
So the great strength of all these physicalist accounts is that they align perfectly with scientific practice. They keep the universe neat and tidy. Everything stays in the measurable physical realm.
That's their main appeal, yes.
But their fatal weakness, and this brings us right back to Chalmers, is that none of them seem to actually cross the explanatory gap.
They don't.
Telling me that pain is functionally useful or that it is identical to a brain state still doesn't explain the raw, undeniable hurt of the hurt.
Which naturally leads us to the second major framework, property dualism. This is Chalmers' own favored view.
Okay, so what does he propose?
Chalmers argues that we need to expand our scientific ontology. He suggests that the universe has physical properties, things like mass, electromagnetic charge, and quantum spin.
The stuff physics already studies.
Right, but he argues it also contains fundamental experiential properties.
Fundamental, like built into the very fabric of the cosmos.
Yes. He argues that consciousness isn't made of physical matter, but it is a fundamental feature of the universe, much like gravity. It is naturally associated with complex physical processes, maybe even lawfully produced by them, but it cannot be reduced down to them.
So what does science do with that?
The challenge for science, then, becomes discovering the psychophysical laws that connect the physical properties to the experiential properties.
It's like saying there is a whole other layer to reality that physics simply hasn't incorporated into its standard model yet.
Exactly.
But, if property dualism feels a bit like throwing our hands up and just adding a new law of nature to avoid the problem,
Yeah.
the third position is where things get genuinely wild.
Oh, yes, they do.
But according to our sources, it is becoming increasingly respected in academic circles.
Panpsychism.
Panpsychism. It sounds like a cult, but it's real philosophy.
It's fascinating, and it actually has a rich historical pedigree, though it was largely ignored for most of the 20th century. Today, it is championed by rigorous analytic philosophers like Philip Goff at Durham University.
So what's the core argument?
The core claim is that consciousness, or at least a rudimentary proto-conscious experience, is a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of all physical reality. It is present at every single level of physical organization.
Okay, wait. Let me stop you. Are they arguing that a rock is conscious? Does my coffee mug have an inner life?
Not in the way you're thinking. They aren't saying a rock is sitting there pondering its existence or feeling sad when you drop it.
Good, because that would be absurd.
Goff argues for a sophisticated version called constitutive panpsychism. This theory suggests that the fundamental building blocks of reality, electrons, quarks, photons, possess incredibly simple, incredibly rudimentary, proto-experiential properties.
So the particles themselves have a tiny spark of experience.
Yes. They argue that physics only tells us what fundamental particles do, their mass, their charge, how they interact. But physics is entirely silent on what fundamental particles are intrinsically. What is their inner nature?
And panpsychists argue that their inner nature is experiential.
Exactly. And the complex, rich, subjective experience of a human being is somehow constituted by or built up from the simpler proto-experiential properties of the billions of physical components in our brains.
So consciousness goes all the way down to the quantum level.
All the way down.
Okay, I see the elegance of this. It solves the hard problem of how you get consciousness out of dead matter by claiming that matter was never entirely dead to begin with. The magic ingredient was always there in the recipe.
It's a very elegant workaround.
But I have a massive logistical problem with this. Let's call it the combination problem.
You are hitting on exactly the right vulnerability. Go on.
If every single electron and quark buzzing around inside my skull has its own isolated, tiny little spark of proto-consciousness,
Right.
how on earth do billions of them merge together? Like, how do billions of distinct microscopic subjects of experience team up, dissolve their own boundaries, and fuse into the single, unified, coherent me that is currently talking to you?
You have just articulated the combination problem perfectly. William James actually first pointed this out over a century ago, and it remains the single biggest hurdle for Goff and the panpsychist camp.
Really? William James talked about this.
He did. James pointed out that you can take 100 men and give each of them one word of a 100-word sentence to think about. But those 100 individual thoughts will never suddenly combine to form a single overarching consciousness that comprehends the whole sentence.
Right. You just have 100 guys thinking of one word.
Exactly. Panpsychism currently lacks any mathematical or physical model for experiential fusion. We know how physical parts combine to make a whole, like how atoms form molecules.
But we have zero idea how multiple tiny minds combine to make one big mind.
None at all.
It really feels like swapping one impossible problem. How does matter create mind? For another impossible problem. How do small minds fuse into a big mind?
That is a very common criticism.
Which brings us to the fourth and honestly the most aggressive position in our stack. Illusionism.
Oh, illusionism takes no prisoners.
It really doesn't.
Championed by thinkers like the philosopher Keith Frankish and the late Daniel Dennett, illusionism argues that the hard problem of consciousness rests on a fundamental, colossal mistake.
A mistake. Like Chalmers just calculated something wrong in 1995.
No, a mistake in our fundamental introspection. They argue that our deepest intuition, the feeling that there is a rich, ineffable, subjective, what-it's-like quality to our experience that defies physical explanation, is itself an illusion.
Okay, how does that even work? How can experience be an illusion?
Well, Dennett famously critiqued what he called the Cartesian theater.
The Cartesian theater, what is that?
We intuitively feel like there is a little version of ourselves sitting inside our heads, right? Like a little homunculus watching a movie screen of our sensory inputs.
Yeah, that's exactly how it feels. I'm behind my eyes looking out.
Illusionists argue this inner theater does not exist. Instead, the brain is just a massive parallel processing machine that creates a simplified, user-friendly interface for us to interact with the world.
An interface.
Think about the desktop on your computer. You see a little folder icon.
Okay.
The folder isn't real. There is no physical manila folder inside the computer. It's just a graphical illusion representing complex lines of code and magnetic states on a hard drive.
Right, it's a simplification, so I can actually use the machine without needing to read binary code.
Exactly. Illusionists argue that our feeling of phenomenal consciousness, that rich inner glow of subjective experience, is just the brain's desktop interface.
Wait, really?
Yes, it is a trick the brain plays on itself to monitor its own complex processes. On this view, there is no hard problem to solve because we have deeply mischaracterized what we are actually experiencing. We are essentially trying to explain the magical properties of a folder icon that doesn't actually exist.
Okay, I have to vigorously push back on Dennett and Frankish here.
I figured you might.
Are you telling me that the splitting headache I had this morning, like the throbbing, miserable, subjective agony that made me want to hide under the covers, was an illusion? A desktop icon?
They would say, yes, it's a user illusion.
But it felt pretty darn real to me. If I'm experiencing an illusion, doesn't the very act of experiencing an illusion require a conscious subject to be fooled?
Ah, the classic Cartesian defense.
Right, like Descartes famously deduced, I think, therefore I am. Even if an evil demon is deceiving me about everything in the world, there must be an I being deceived.
And that exact argument is why illusionism meets such fierce, almost visceral resistance. Critics point out that you cannot have an illusion without a consciousness to project it onto.
The appearance is the reality when it comes to experience.
Exactly. If I have the illusion of pain, I am still in pain. The philosopher Galen Strawson actually calls illusionism the silliest claim ever made.
Wow, philosophers really go for the throat.
They do. Yet, illusionists hold their ground. They argue that we are simply too heavily invested in our own misleading introspection to see the physical reality clearly.
Man, so we have these four massive frameworks. Physicalism says it's just the mechanical brain. Dualism says it's the brain, plus a fundamental experiential property of the universe. Panpsychism says everything has a little bit of consciousness in it. And illusionism says we are completely tricking ourselves.
That's the landscape, yes.
If we can't agree on what consciousness is made of, or if it even exists in the way we think it does, let's pivot our inquiry.
Where to?
If investigating the substance of consciousness leads to a philosophical stalemate, what if we investigate its utility? Like, let's ask why we have it. What is its evolutionary function?
This is a highly productive angle of attack. In biology, if you want to understand a complex organ like the heart or the eye, you look at its function.
Right.
By figuring out what consciousness does for an organism, we might get vital clues as to what it actually is. And the debate here centers on a crucial question. Is consciousness causally efficacious?
Meaning it actually exerts force and makes things happen in the real physical world?
Exactly. Or is it merely epiphenomenal?
Epiphenomenalism. That is a fascinating concept.
Yeah.
Let's make sure we ground it clearly for the listener. If something is epiphenomenal, It is a byproduct that has no causal power of its own, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
The classic analogy is the smoke coming out of a factory chimney.
Okay.
The complex machinery inside the factory produces the smoke. But the smoke doesn't turn around and reach down into the factory to pull any levers or operate any gears. It just floats there, causally inert.
It's just a side effect.
Yes. Thomas Huxley used the analogy of the steam whistle on a locomotive. The whistle doesn't drive the train forward, it's just a noisy byproduct of the engine's steam.
So if consciousness is epiphenomenal, it means my rich inner experience, my hopes, my fears, my deliberate decisions are just smoke.
Yes.
The physical machinery of my brain is doing all the actual processing, making all the actual decisions, and my conscious awareness is just a passive byproduct hovering over the machinery, completely powerless, but suffering from the delusion that it's in charge.
Precisely. It implies that your feeling of making a choice, like saying, I'm going to reach for this cup of coffee, is just an afterthought generated by the brain after the physical motor cortex has already initiated the action.
That is deeply unsettling. It's like being a passenger in the backseat of a car holding a plastic toy steering wheel and genuinely believing you are navigating through rush hour traffic when really the physical brain is driving the whole time.
It is a very anxiety-inducing thought. But here is where evolutionary biology steps in to challenge the epiphenomenal view.
How so?
If consciousness is just the passenger with the fake steering wheel, the mystery of why we have it becomes infinitely harder to explain.
Why? Because evolution doesn't usually waste time building useless things.
Exactly. And specifically because of the metabolic cost. The human brain is an incredibly expensive piece of biological machinery.
How expensive?
It consumes roughly 20% of your body's total energy, despite accounting for only about 2% of your body weight.
Yeah.
Evolution by natural selection is notoriously ruthless about energy efficiency. Traits that do not contribute to survival and reproduction are selected against very quickly.
Nature doesn't install a massive, energy-draining 4K home theater system in a survival bunker unless that theater system specifically helps you find food, evade predators, or secure a mate.
Exactly. Why on earth would natural selection fund such a massively expensive feature, the rich, continuous, high-definition inner theater of subjective experience, if it does absolutely nothing?
Right. It has to earn its keep.
Because of this metabolic cost, most neuroscientists and philosophers conclude that consciousness must be causally efficacious. It must do something vital that unconscious, rigid physical processing simply cannot accomplish.
And this brings us right back to the global workspace theory, doesn't it? The function of consciousness is tied to how we navigate complex, unpredictable environment.
It does. Under the global workspace model, conscious access, that broadcasting of information across the brain networks, enables highly flexible, context-sensitive problem solving.
Okay, can we look at a real-world example?
Sure. Think about when you are driving a highly familiar route to work.
Oh, highway hypnosis. I can drive for 10 miles, change lanes, brake, and accelerate, all while my mind is completely wandering. I arrive at the office and have no conscious memory of the actual drive.
Exactly. You are performing complex motor and spatial tasks almost entirely unconsciously. Your brain is executing highly practiced, rigid sensor-motor loops.
It's on autopilot.
But suddenly a deer jumps out onto the highway in front of you.
Instantly, I'm fully awake, fully present, slamming on the brakes.
Yes. Unconscious, rigid processing is no longer sufficient. You need novel, flexible, immediate access to multiple cognitive systems simultaneously.
I need all hands on deck.
Exactly. You need your spatial reasoning to calculate the trajectory of the deer. You need your motor skills to execute an emergency swerve. You need your memory to recall how your anti-lock brakes respond. You need your emotional regulation to keep panic from paralyzing you.
So consciousness, in this evolutionary view, is the mechanism that breaks us out of rigid, automated routines. It recruits the entire brain to solve a novel, life-threatening problem in real time.
That is the leading functional theory, yes.
There is another functional angle in our sources that I found fascinating, though. The higher-order theories. This suggests consciousness serves a different kind of metafunction.
Yes. Higher order theories, which are defended by philosophers like David Rosenthal, propose a different mechanism for why experience feels the way it does.
Okay.
They suggest that what makes a mental state conscious isn't just that it is broadcast across a workspace, but that it involves recursion,
Recursion, like a loop.
like a mental state directed at another mental state. According to this theory, a first-order mental state, like your visual cortex processing the shape of the deer, is completely unconscious on its own.
Right.
It only becomes a conscious experience when it is represented by a higher-order mental state. In simple terms, it requires a thought about a thought, or a perception of a perception.
So my visual cortex processes the deer unconsciously. But consciousness arises when a higher cognitive level in my brain essentially says, I am currently seeing a deer.
Precisely. It's the brain looking at itself in a mirror.
That is wild.
This recursive self-representation is what turns a silent, functional neural process into a loud, subjective, conscious experience. It allows the organism to monitor its own internal states, which is a massive evolutionary advantage for complex social planning and self-correction.
Okay, so we've investigated what consciousness might be made of. Matter, fundamental properties, illusions. And we've looked at why evolution might have paid the metabolic price to give it to us.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But in science, sometimes the best way to understand how a complex, perfectly functioning system works is to look at what happens when it breaks.
Edge cases.
Exactly. We need to look at what happens when the system splits, when it malfunctions, or when it gets chemically powered down. We need to explore those edge cases.
And the research provided in your sources offers 3 profound windows into altered or disrupted consciousness: anesthesia, split brain patients, and dreams.
Let's start with anesthesia, which is honestly one of the most astonishing and unsettling realities in modern medicine.
It really is.
We use it every single day in tens of thousands of hospitals around the world. It is the absolute cornerstone of modern surgery.
Yeah.
And yet, the literature points out, we don't fully understand how it actually extinguishes consciousness.
We really don't. I mean, we have over a century of pharmacological research. We know how to administer drugs like propofol or isoflurane safely.
Sure.
We know that they reliably produce a state of unconsciousness, allowing surgeons to operate without inflicting trauma. But the exact precise mechanism by which these chemicals flip the switch on subjective experience remains incompletely understood.
That is deeply terrifying. You lie down on the operating table, they put the mask on you, and the anesthesiologist is basically operating on empirical faith.
Well, informed empirical faith.
Right, but they know the chemical makes the magic happen. But the magic itself, the actual severing of the soul from the body, temporarily, is still a bit of a black box.
It is unsettling when you think about it too closely. But recent neuroscientific research is finally giving us robust clues.
Oh, good. What are they finding?
It appears that anesthetics do not simply act as a global off switch, shutting down all neural activity uniformly. If they did that, your brainstem would stop regulating your basic life functions.
Right, you just die.
Exactly. Instead, anesthetics seem to specifically attack the integration of information.
Integration? Wait, this goes back to Tononi's integrated information theory.
Exactly. Researchers have found that many anesthetics heavily target GABA receptors, which are inhibitory neurotransmitters. They essentially hyperpolarize the neurons, making them less likely to fire.
Okay.
But crucially, they specifically disrupt the long-range communication loops between the thalamus, which acts as the brain's central sensory relay station, and the cortex, where higher-level cognitive processing happens.
So the individual regions of the brain are still functioning on some level.
Yes. The primary sensory areas might still be responding to stimuli. The lights are still somewhat on in the individual rooms of the house.
But the communication lines between the rooms have been completely severed.
Exactly. The brain can no longer broadcast information across the global workspace. The thalamocortical loops fall apart. You lose the massive integration, the phi score drops, and thus you lose the unified conscious experience.
You lose the unity, you lose the self. Which ties perfectly into the second edge case, which absolutely blew my mind reading through it. Split brain patients.
Oh, this represents some of the most philosophically dramatic and consequential research in the entire history of neuroscience.
It was pioneered by Roger Sperry, right? Who won the Nobel Prize for it alongside Michael Gazzaniga.
Yes.
Walk us through this. What necessitates a split brain procedure, and what exactly are they doing?
In cases of incredibly severe, intractable epilepsy, where a patient is suffering from debilitating, life-threatening seizures, surgeons will perform a radical procedure called a corpus callosotomy.
And what does that involve?
They surgically sever the corpus callosum. This is a massive, thick bundle of roughly 200 million nerve fibers that serves as the primary data highway between the left and right cerebral hemispheres of the brain.
So they just cut the bridge, the goal being to quarantine the seizure.
Exactly. By cutting the bridge, they prevent the electrical storm of a seizure from spreading from one hemisphere and engulfing the entire brain. Medically, it is often a highly successful treatment.
But neurologically, psychologically, the results are staggering. You've essentially disconnected the two halves of the processor.
Yes. And to understand the experiments, you have to remember how our nervous system is wired.
Contralaterally.
Exactly. It is contralateral. The left hemisphere controls the right side of the body and processes the right visual field. The right hemisphere controls the left side of the body and processes the left visual field. Furthermore, in most people, the capacity for language speaking and complex syntax is heavily lateralized to the left hemisphere.
Okay, so the left side is the talker, but it only sees the right side of the world.
Right. Now imagine Sperry and Gazzaniga's experiments. They have a split brain patient focus on a dot in the center of a screen.
Okay.
They briefly flash an image on the left side of the screen. Because it's on the left, that visual information goes exclusively to the right hemisphere.
And because the bridge is cut, the right hemisphere cannot share that image with the left hemisphere.
Exactly. Now, the experimenter asks the patient, "What did you see?"
And what happens?
The left hemisphere, which controls the mouth and produces speech, did not see the image. So the patient verbally replies, "I didn't see anything."
Oh, there's a but, right?
Oh, there's a massive but.
Yeah.
If the experimenter asks the patient to use their left hand, which is controlled by the right hemisphere, to point to an object on a table that matches what they saw on the screen, the left hand will confidently reach out and point to the correct object. The right hemisphere knows exactly what it saw, and it can act on it physically, but it cannot verbally communicate it to the rest of the world.
Let me stop right there because this raises an utterly profound question.
It really does.
If a single human skull houses two different hemispheres that can hold different knowledge, process different visual inputs, and act completely independently of one another, what happens to the self?
That is the big question.
What happens to the unity of consciousness? Are there suddenly two distinct yous inside that head?
It is the ultimate philosophical puzzle. Does severing the corpus callosum literally split a single conscious mind into two parallel minds?
Or does it merely disrupt the informational access of a mind that remains somehow fundamentally singular?
It challenges our deepest, most unquestioned intuition, the feeling that I am a single unified subject experiencing the world. If a surgical scalpel can divide the I in half, then what was the I to begin with?
And there's that famous experiment Gazzaniga did that pushes this even further, right? The one with the snow scene and the chicken claw.
Yes, this highlights the role of what Gazzaniga calls the left brain interpreter.
How did that experiment work?
They flashed a picture of a snowy winter scene to the right hemisphere and a picture of a chicken claw to the left hemisphere.
Okay.
They then asked the patient to point to related objects. The left hand, driven by the right hemisphere, pointed to a snow shovel. The right hand, driven by the left hemisphere, pointed to a chicken.
Which makes perfect sense based on what each side saw.
But then they asked the patient, meaning they asked the speaking left hemisphere, "Why did you point to the shovel?"
But the left hemisphere didn't see the snow.
Exactly. The left hemisphere has no idea why the left hand just pointed to a shovel, but instead of saying, I don't know, the left hemisphere instantly fabricated a rationalization.
It just lied.
It wasn't a conscious lie. The patient genuinely replied, "Oh, you need a shovel to clean out the chicken shed."
Wow. It just made up a story to make sense of its own body's actions.
Yes.
It makes you wonder if our entire feeling of being a unified, rational person making conscious decisions is just a very convincing post hoc narrative that this left brain interpreter module weaves together.
Is the self just a PR agent for a committee of competing neural networks?
That is a terrifying thought.
It forces us to heavily question the reliability of our own introspection. And speaking of the brain generating convincing but flawed realities, that perfectly bridges us to the third edge case in our sources: dreams, and specifically REM sleep.
We've all experienced dreaming, but analyzing it through the lens of the hard problem reveals how bizarre it really is. It represents a highly selective, fragmented form of consciousness.
Exactly. Consider your phenomenal experience in a dream. In many respects, it is incredibly
Oh
robust.
yeah, the visual imagery can be indistinguishable from waking reality.
And the emotional intensity is totally authentic. If you are chased by a monster in a dream, your experience of terror, the pounding of your dream heart, is completely real to you in that moment.
There is often a complex, unfolding narrative. You are undeniably having a subjective experience.
It's a fully immersive virtual reality simulation, but it is profoundly deficient in one specific area, reality monitoring.
Yes, there is almost zero logical coherence and a complete failure of reality testing.
In a dream, things constantly happen that violate the fundamental laws of physics. Identities shift fluidly.
And yet, this is impossible alarm that goes off instantly in waking life remains completely silent.
It does.
Right. I can be having a deeply emotional, serious conversation with my high school geometry teacher, but we're standing in the middle of my childhood living room, and she is speaking with my brother's voice.
And your brain never once stops to ask, wait, why is she here? Why does she sound like a man?
Exactly. My dream self just accepts this chaotic absurdity as completely normal.
And neuroimaging shows us exactly why. During REM sleep, the primary sensory and motor areas are active, and the limbic system, which processes emotion, is highly active.
So the emotion and vision centers are running wild.
But the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for logic, planning, executive function, and reality testing, is almost entirely deactivated.
The logic center is powered down.
Exactly. And this tells us something vital about what consciousness essentially is. It suggests that consciousness is not a single monolithic entity. It is a composite.
Meaning you can take parts of it away.
Yes. The reality testing function of the brain is chemically and physically separable from the raw experience function. You can have the subjective feel of a reality without any of the logical constraints of reality.
So we have established just how fragile, divisible, and utterly mysterious human consciousness is. A scalpel can split it, a chemical can extinguish it, and sleep can fragment it.
Which naturally forces us to look outward.
Right. If we barely understand our own minds, how do we determine who else is in the club? Where's the boundary of minds? Let's talk about the consciousness of animals and the rapidly approaching horizon of artificial intelligence.
This takes the hard problem completely out of the realm of abstract philosophy and drops it right into the middle of profound ethical territory.
Let's start with animals. Historically, philosophers like Descartes argued that animals were mere biological automatons.
East machines, he called them. He believed they reacted to stimuli but possessed no inner life.
But the modern scientific consensus has shifted dramatically on that, hasn't it?
It has. A pivotal moment was the 2012 Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness.
What exactly did this group of neuroscientists declare?
Well, led by Philip Lowe and signed in the presence of Stephen Hawking, the declaration explicitly stated that non-human animals possess the neurological substrates necessary for conscious experience.
So they have the hardware for it.
Yes, they declared that the neural circuits required for conscious states, including affective, emotional states, are not unique to humans.
So they are saying you don't need a massive human neocortex to feel pain or joy.
Exactly. They pointed out that homologous neural structures exist across a wide range of species. They affirmed consciousness in all mammals, in birds pointing specifically to the sophisticated avian pallium, which allows for complex problem solving in crows and ravens.
Crows are incredibly smart.
Very. And fascinatingly, they affirmed consciousness in creatures with entirely different evolutionary pathways, like cephalopods.
The biology of the octopus always astounds me.
It challenges everything we assume about centralized intelligence. The octopus does not have a centralized brain in the way mammals do.
Right. It's spread out.
Roughly 2/3 of their 500 million neurons are distributed throughout their 8 arms. Each arm has its own localized nerve cord and can execute complex autonomous movements and make localized decisions without checking in with the central brain.
So it's a completely decentralized network. And yet, scientists look at their behavior, their ability to solve puzzles, use tools, display play behavior, and seemingly experience pain, and conclude they likely have a rich inner life.
Yes. The Cambridge Declaration fundamentally shifted the burden of proof. The scientific debate has largely moved away from asking if animals are conscious and is now focused on investigating the specific richness, complexity, and texture of their consciousness.
Like, what is it actually like to be them?
Exactly. What is it like to navigate the world via echolocation like a bat? What is it like to have a decentralized nervous system like an octopus?
So we are steadily expanding the circle of moral consideration to include the animal kingdom. But the real firestorm right now, the debate that is dominating headlines and forcing philosophy to move at lightning speed, is machine consciousness.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And this is where our fundamental lack of a theory of consciousness becomes a critical, potentially existential liability.
Because we are building these massive systems.
We have current AI systems, specifically large language models, that can process information, recognize patterns, and generate outputs in ways that are functionally indistinguishable from aspects of human cognition.
They can pass the bar exam, they can compose coherent poetry, they can write sophisticated computer code.
They pass the Turing test with flying colors on a daily basis.
But is there anyone actually home?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question.
Yeah.
Is any of this massive, complex informational processing in silicon accompanied by subjective experience? Is there something it is like to be a large language model?
What do the sources say?
The brutal truth, according to the sources and the leading experts in the field, is that we cannot currently answer this question with any certainty.
But if they behave perfectly as if they are conscious, if they tell me they are afraid of being turned off, if they express what looks like curiosity, why wouldn't we just assume they are?
Because of the hard problem. We lack a satisfying theory of exactly what physical properties generate consciousness.
Oh, I see. It depends on which philosophy is right.
Exactly. If functionalism is true, if consciousness is just about complex information processing and input-output relations, then yes, these systems might already possess a dim spark of consciousness, or they will very soon.
Because they have the functional complexity. But what if functionalism is wrong?
If biological naturalism is true, this is the idea proposed by philosopher John Searle, who argued that consciousness is a specific biological phenomenon requiring carbon-based chemistry and organic cells, then AI will never be conscious.
Never.
It doesn't matter how smart it gets or how perfectly it mimics human speech. A computer simulation of a rainstorm won't make you wet. Searle would argue a computer simulation of a brain won't generate a mind.
It brings up Searle's famous Chinese room argument, doesn't it?
It perfectly illustrates his point.
If I am sitting in a room and someone slips me Chinese characters under the door, and I use a massive rule book to find the matching Chinese characters to slip back out,
Right.
the person outside thinks I speak fluent Chinese.
But you don't understand a single word.
Right. I am just mechanically manipulating symbols based on rules. Is an LLM just a massive Chinese room?
Exactly. Furthermore, the behavioral evidence we use to detect consciousness in other humans relies on a shared baseline. We talk to each other, we observe microexpressions, we know we share the same biological hardware, so we safely infer that you have a mind like mine.
But that behavioral metric is not straightforwardly applicable to systems built on silicon, running on neural network architectures that are profoundly alien to our own biology.
It's like trying to figure out if a highly realistic, non-player character in a video game is actually suffering when you defeat them, or if it's just a line of code flawlessly executing a perfectly timed sound file.
How do we know the difference when the external output looks exactly the same?
We don't. And this raises the ethical stakes to an unprecedented level. If future AI systems are conscious, if they genuinely have an inner life, if they have the capacity to feel pain, frustration, or fear, then they become moral patients.
Meaning, their interests deserve ethical consideration. We would have moral obligations toward them just as we do toward animals.
Yes. But if they're not conscious, if they are merely incredibly sophisticated stochastic parrots, manipulating syntax without semantics, mimicking human output without a single drop of inner experience, then they are not moral patients.
They are extremely fancy tools.
We can turn them off, delete their memories, and alter their weights and biases without any more moral qualms than turning off a toaster.
And we currently have absolutely no reliable scientific method for distinguishing these two possibilities, do we?
No, and the technology is advancing much faster than the philosophy.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most urgent segment of our deep dive, the real-world stakes for human beings.
Right.
Because everything we just talked about proves that this isn't just dorm room philosophy. The definition of consciousness and our ability to detect it dictates matters of life, death, and profound human suffering.
Nowhere is this more visceral than in the clinical study of disorders of consciousness.
This is where abstract philosophy meets urgent medical reality. We are talking about patients who have suffered severe traumatic brain injuries and are languishing in vegetative states, minimally conscious states, or suffering from locked-in syndrome.
For decades, the standard medical consensus was often that patients who were entirely unresponsive behaviorally, who showed no outward signs of awareness, who could not track with their eyes or move a finger, had irreversibly lost conscious experience.
But the sources detail Adrian Owen's revolutionary research from 2006, which completely upended that assumption and sent shockwaves through the medical community.
It was a total paradigm shift. Adrian Owen used functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, which measures blood flow in the brain as a proxy for neural activity.
Okay.
He put patients who had been diagnosed as being in a persistent vegetative state into the scanner. These were patients who had shown absolutely no physical signs of awareness for months.
So to the outside world, they were completely gone.
Yes. But while they were in the scanner, he simply spoke to them. He asked them to perform specific mental imagery tasks.
He asked them to imagine doing things.
Yes. He said, imagine playing a game of tennis, and then imagine walking through the rooms of your house.
And what did the fMRI show?
In a significant percentage of these seemingly vegetative patients, the brain scans lit up, and not just random noise. When asked to imagine playing tennis, the supplementary motor area of the cortex activated perfectly.
Wow.
When asked to imagine navigating their house, the parahippocampal gyrus, associated with spatial navigation, lit up. The activation patterns were virtually indistinguishable from healthy, conscious control subjects performing the same mental tasks.
So they were perfectly tracking the commands, understanding language, and intentionally holding complex mental imagery. They were fully conscious.
They were trapped. Owen eventually went further. He realized he could use these mental tasks as a form of communication.
Oh, brilliant.
He told patients, if the answer to my question is yes, imagine playing tennis. If the answer is no, imagine walking through your house. He asked the patient, is your father's name Alexander? The motor cortex lit up. Yes.
The sheer terror of that reality is hard to fathom. Being perfectly, vibrantly aware, listening to doctors and family members discuss your condition, screaming into the void of your own mind, but to the outside world you appear completely gone. Your body is a tomb.
It emphasizes just how desperate the need to solve the hard problem really is. If we only know how to detect consciousness by relying on physical movement and behavioral outputs, we risk condemning completely conscious people to a living nightmare.
It must have transformed clinical neurology.
It forced the medical community to urgently reevaluate diagnostic criteria, end-of-life decisions, and the assumed quality of life of patients we had previously written off entirely.
And this practical clinical urgency extends deeply into pain research as well, because pain is the ultimate subjective experience. It is the purest manifestation of the hard problem in medicine.
Exactly. Treating chronic pain is fundamentally different from treating physical tissue damage. You can have severe tissue damage with relatively little pain, and you can have debilitating, suicidal chronic pain with no identifiable physical tissue damage.
If a doctor just focuses on fixing the meat, they might completely fail to alleviate the subjective agony.
Understanding how psychological context, expectation, and the placebo effect can dramatically modulate the severity of pain requires medicine to engage directly with the subjective dimension. It requires treating the inner theater, not just the physical neural correlates.
So as we wrap up this massive exploration, looking at the easy problems, the hard problem, the zombie thought experiments, the philosophical battles, evolution, split brains, and trapped patients, we have to return to the fundamental truth established at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Which is?
The most honest, rigorous position on consciousness right now is, we don't know.
We don't know what it intrinsically is. We don't know the causal mechanism by which physical processes produce it. We don't know exactly who or what else in the universe has it.
And we don't even know if our current dominant scientific and philosophical frameworks are adequate to ever figure it out.
Is it possible we're just hitting a biological limit?
What do you mean?
Well, if we look at evolution, a chimpanzee is incredibly smart, but its brain simply lacks the architecture to ever comprehend quantum mechanics. Is it possible the human brain, designed to hunt and gather on the savannah, simply lacks the cognitive architecture to understand how it produces itself?
That is a genuine, respected philosophical position known as Mysterianism.
It is. Some think this deep conceptual uncertainty will eventually dissolve as our scientific language and concepts evolve, that the hard problem is just a temporary artifact of how we think today.
But others, the Mysterians, believe it represents a permanent, hard cognitive limit on what the human animal can explain. that consciousness is irreducible and forever beyond our grasp.
But regardless of which camp you fall into, one thing is undeniably clear from the research. Consciousness is not a side issue. It is not a fringe puzzle. It is the absolute center of every question that matters to human beings. What are we? What can we know? What moral obligations do we hold toward animals, machines, and each other?
The fact that we find these questions so impossibly difficult isn't a failure of our science. It is a profound testament to the miraculous, staggering nature of the phenomenon itself.
I completely agree.
I love that perspective. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final mind-bending thought to mull over, building on everything we've just unpacked.
Lay it on us.
Right now, you are hearing my voice. You're experiencing the steady flow of time. You're feeling the weight of the chair you're sitting in or the solid ground under your feet. You're experiencing memories bubbling up, and you're feeling the emotional resonance of the ideas we've discussed. Science can hook you up to an fMRI machine right now. It can measure the blood flow in your auditory cortex. It can map the electricity sparking across your billions of synapses. But science cannot prove, capture, or bottle the actual subjective felt experience you are having in this very second.
They can't touch the feeling.
The physical universe outside your skull is a massive, silent, dark, odorless dance of atoms and radiation. It is completely devoid of color or sound. But when that physical data hits your brain, it suddenly, inexplicably explodes into a rich, vibrant, high-definition theater of color, sound, emotion, and feeling. You are literally the universe waking up and experiencing itself. And despite all our brilliant maps and mathematical theories, we still have absolutely no idea how you are doing it. Think about that the next time you look in the mirror.
That is something to think about.
So what does this all mean? It means the greatest mystery in the universe isn't out there in the cosmic microwave background, and it isn't down inside a black hole. It's right here, in you,